Some editorial writers are hearing a theme emerging in President Obama's recent speeches. The president pledging to use his executive power to impose policy when he believes Congress is not cooperating. Here's the president in Illinois just last week.
Some of these ideas I've talked about before. Some of the ideas I offer will be new. Some will require Congress. Some I will pursue on my own. I will not allow gridlock or inaction or willful indifference to get in our way. Whatever executive authority I have to help the middle class, I'll use it. Where I can't act on my own and Congress isn't cooperating, I'll pick up the phone, I'll call CEOs, I'll call philanthropists, I'll call college presidents, I'll call labor leaders, I'll call anybody who can help and enlist them in our efforts. So yes, Congress is tough right now, but that's not going to stop me. We're going to do everything we can wherever we can, with or without Congress, to make things happen.
So the question now, is the imperial presidency starting to threaten our democracy? Joe Trippi is a former campaign manager for Howard Dean and a Fox News contributor. Mark Thiessen is a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And Daniel Henninger is deputy editorial page editor for the Wall Street Journal and author of a column that has raised this very issue. Gentlemen, welcome to you all.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
All right, Dan, I'll start with you. You say people should not be surprised and really complaining about this because it's not like the president ever made it a secret that this might be the way he wants to operate.
Well, we just heard him say it, Shannon, and I think the danger here is not so much a threat to the democracy, but the system of checks and balances that the founding fathers set up when they established the country. If the founders had wanted a parliamentary system where the government in power simply put its policies into place, they would have created that system. But instead, they created one which the executive implements laws passed by Congress and the judiciary decides whether they're constitutional. And I think the president, by running around the country diminishing and demeaning Congress in this way, is setting himself up as gaining public support, popular will, as it were, to simply issue a whole series of executive orders over the next 3 years that will put in place laws that have not been legislated by Congress. I think he'll probably use the Environmental Protection Agency to do this, the Labor Department, the new Consumer Protection Agency, and it seems to me that very much threatens an unbalancing of the system that the founders set up, Shannon.
Yeah, and Joe, what of that? Because everybody has their roles, their responsibilities, but also the checks and balances. We have that very skillfully laid out by our founders, by our framers. And the president simply wants to say, hey, if Congress doesn't do what I want, I'm going to go around it. And the truth is, it's an applause line for him. He's used it many times over the last few years, and we heard it in some of those clips there. The people listening seem to like the idea that he wants to do his own thing despite Congress.
And Shannon, so it's been since every president since George Washington. The opposition of the sitting president always declares him reaching for the imperial presidency, trying to gain more power. That's been the case. I remember on the left in 2003, 2004, I was one of the people out there. We referred to George Bush as King George, a lot of us. I mean, that's how we saw George Bush and his administration. And I really don't think there's much of a threat to the checks and balances. It's no more a threat to our democracy than the Senate rule on filibuster, the Senate's ability, one senator's ability to hold a nomination of the president up, the need to get 67 votes in the Senate to get anything done. I mean, all these things are the checks and balances, and any president needs to use. He's the only one that's elected nationwide. No one else is. Everybody else, all the senators and members or districts or states. He's got to use that power to get what he wants done. And then, yes, the other checks and balances and the courts can step in, but I don't think there's anything. This is not unusual. Obama's not doing anything that any other president, particularly George Bush, didn't do.
All right, Mark, to Joe's point there, I mean, the president has to use his power to get things done. A lot of people would say that involves building relationships on Capitol Hill. That involves persuading people, having meetings, having some kind of consensus. But the criticism there about President George W. Bush, I mean, for decades, people have been saying, Republicans and Democrats alike, that they feel that the power of the executive office in America is eroding the other branches to some extent, and things are getting out of whack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this isn't about the system. This is about Barack Obama. And look, I was in the White House when Joe was accusing us of having an imperial presidency. And you know who else did that? Senator Barack Obama. Senator Barack Obama said during the 2008 campaign that Bush was expanding his own powers and treating the Constitution like a nuisance, and that he wouldn't do it when he was in office. Well, now he's out. The irony is he's out there doing much more broadly the very thing that he accused George Bush of doing. I mean, perfect example: aid to Egypt. The law says very clearly that if there's a coup d'état, you have to cut off aid. He's not doing it. His own law that he passed, Obamacare, there's no provision in there that allows him to suspend or delay the implementation of the employer mandate. He's doing it anyway. And another perfect example is recess appointments. You know, during the Bush administration, I remember being in meetings in the senior staff where it was discussed whether they could override, even if Congress was staying in session to prevent a recess appointment, whether the president could do it anyway because they were technically not in recess, and it was determined we couldn't do it. Barack Obama did it. So he's doing all sorts of things that George Bush didn't even contemplate doing when he was in office, and he's running roughshod over the Constitution after accusing Bush of doing the same.
And Dan, I want to bring you back in here because, of course, the Supreme Court's going to take up that issue of the NLRB recess appointments in its term that kicks off in October. In the meantime, we have the issue of federal regulations. EPA came up and some other organizations. I'm looking right now. This is the government's website, regulations.gov. It has, over the last 90 days, 6,471 proposed federal regulations. That's according to their listing. How does that work into this process of, if you can't get it done on Capitol Hill, have a federal agency do it for you?
Well, exactly, Shannon. I mean, early in his first term, the president tried to put a cap-and-trade bill through Congress, but it didn't make it through, in large part because many Democratic senators from coal-using or coal-producing states would not support it. And now his new EPA administrator, Gina McCarthy, has just said publicly in the last few days that the president has told her to snap to and get out there and start issuing regulations that will achieve the climate goals that he wanted to do in his first term. And she said, get over it, I'm going to do it. So I think there's a perfect example here of a president who is basically done with Congress and the congressional system and has decided to use what authority and powers he has to put in place laws that will affect the entire country. And my concern here, Shannon, is not merely with Barack Obama. This has always been a presidential temptation. And if he's able to get away with it, I'm afraid the successive presidents will, and we'll end up with a system very much different than the one we thought we created in 1789.
That's something that all Americans should keep an eye on, regardless of the party of the president. Joe, Dan, Mark, thank you all.
Good to be with you.
Shannon.
Thank you.